but his father had this flat in Crown Heights, Brooklyn.
Really, yeah. Must have cost him a package, man. Must have cost him a lot of money. I mean,
Well, they were from the big jewelry firm.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Hello,
Very
Rabbi.
I'm going to cut in there.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to turn to the chapter of the day. We'll be learning the laws of trespassing or misappropriating products that belong to the temple. Today we're going to continue with this theme, the laws of Me'ilah and the consequences thereof. And the focus today is shift from actual animals or product, as it were, to money that was set aside for the purpose of sacrifices, and how is that treated if one uses it for their own personal benefits. Let me share the screen, and we will begin with the first halakha momentarily. And just get a thumbs up that you can see the screen. We all good?
Yeah, thumbs up.
Thank you, David. Let's pop off this so you can see me if you want to see me.
Hi, Rabbi. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jeff. Welcome. Okay, we're just getting started. So we're on the top of the page. The first halakha, chapter 4 of the laws of Me'ilah. When a person set aside money for a sin offering, or burnt offering, a guilt offering, turtle doves or young doves, the prohibition against Me'ilah applies to them from the time you set them aside. So in other words, if your money is set aside for these particular offerings, then you use the money for personal use, you've transgressed, and from that moment, and you would have the same consequences of the laws of Me'ilah to repay plus a fifth and bring your guilt offering. If you set them aside for peace offerings, the prohibition against Me'ilah does not apply, and that's because korban shlamim, there was personal benefit that a person would have anyway. And just as there's no me'ilah on the animal of a korban shlamim, there's no me'ilah on the money set aside for the korban shlamim. Halacha base. When a person consecrates the value of one limb of an animal to the altar, there's an unresolved doubt whether the holiness spreads throughout the entire animal or not. We've learned of this previously. Somebody set aside a limb. What happens to the rest of the animal? Now, obviously, so ideally what should happen is that it should be sold, and the value of that limb would then be used for for some purpose of the temple or sacrifice. So in this instance, what happens now to their money? So he says, therefore, because it's unresolved whether the holiness spread to the whole animal or not, therefore it should be offered and not redeemed. So usually it would be redeemed, right? But here you're not sure what happens to their money. So it's better that it gets used as a sacrifice. If it is redeemed, so what happens if you did redeem it, in other words, you sold it, then the prohibition against Me'ilah does not apply to the money used to redeem it. Because of the doubt, the Me'ilah transgression doesn't apply. But again, ideally, you should avoid that. You don't want to have money from that. You would rather offer that animal as a korban. Halacha 3. When a person sets aside money for the sacrifices to be offered so at the conclusion of his Nazirite vow. So somebody takes on the restrictions of a Nazir. He has certain korbanot that he has to bring at the end. He sets aside money. And there's different types of korbanot, right? There's the sin offering and there's the burnt offering. Now, he's not allowed to benefit from that money. If he does benefit from it, he does not violate the prohibition against Me'ilah. Why? Because all of the funds are fit to be used to purchase a peace offering, and the prohibition against Me'ilah does not apply to a peace offering because it's not specific, and he could have used the money for a peace offering. It's the only part of the peace offering that Me'ilah would apply to is the fats and organs after the blood has already been cast, sprinkled on the altar. In that part, which must be burnt on the altar, that is completely sanctified, and there would be Me'ilah on that. But generally, a korban shlamim does not have the restrictions of Me'ilah. If he does, so if this Nazareth sets aside money, now he does, and we said he shouldn't be touching that money. But if he did, there's no violation of Me'ilah. But what is if the guy died? The money should be used for free will offerings. Because it's been set aside for offerings, you can just bring nedavas with that money. It still gets used for the purpose of something in the Beit HaMikdash. If the money, so that the first scenario is when he put aside money for all the necessary korbanot that he's going to have to bring at the conclusion of his Nazirite vow. But if the money was explicitly designated for particular sacrifices, the money for the sin offering should be taken to the Mediterranean Sea. Now he's passed away. Now the sin offering, there is me'ilah for the sin offering. And a sin offering can only be brought either if there was a sin or there's a sinner. If somebody passes away, there's no longer a sinner. You can't bring that offering any longer. That money now is designated and nobody's allowed to benefit from it. So therefore it has to be basically thrown somewhere where it will never be used. He goes and says one should not benefit from them, nor does the prohibition against me'ilah apply. The money for the burnt offering should be used for a burnt offering, and the prohibition against me'ilah applies. So the money that you can use for korbanot, such as the money that was designated for the burnt offering, has that sanctity, and then if you use it for personal use, you will be liable for me'ilah. Now, when a person said, this money is for my sin offering and the remainder for my Nazirite offerings, if he benefits from all the remaining money, he violates the prohibition against me'ilah, because included in that is money set aside for part sacrifices that can be bought. But if he benefited only from part of it, he does not violate the prohibition of me'ilah. Why? Because you can always say the part that I used was the part that would have been used for the peace offering, upon which there is no me'ilah. Similarly, if he said, this money is for my burnt offering and the remainder is for my Nazarite offering, if he benefits from all the remaining money, then he does violate the prohibition against me'ilah. If he benefits only from a part of it, he does not violate that prohibition again, because you can always say, I use the part that me'ilah does not apply to. The rationale is that the prohibition against me'ilah does not apply to the peace offering. And as we said, he can always say that that's the money that I used. If he set aside money and said, this is for my burnt offering, this is for my sin offering, this is for my peace offering. So he's got 3 piles of money, and the money became intermingled. Now, in other words, the money that was set aside for peace offering, there's no me'ilah on. But the money that's set aside for a burnt offering, there is me'ilah on. And at one point, you knew which pile was which. Now they mix together. So what do? So he says the prohibition against me'ilah applies both whether you benefit from the entire sum or only from a portion of the money. Because you don't know which is which, but it's been clearly, specifically designated, he would violate me'ilah if he took any of that money, used any of that money for personal benefit. But now he's got a whole mishmash. What does he actually do? He's not going to use it for personal benefit. If he did, he's liable. What do you do with that pile of money now? So he says what he should do to correct the situation is he should bring 3 animals and then transfer the whole of the money for the sin offering wherever it is on the one for the sin offering. So basically, you'll take the whole pile. You got the 3 animals in front of you. Buy the 3 animals, and you'll say whichever money was designated for the olah from this pile will be, pay for this olah animal. Whichever part of this money was the chatat will pay for the chatat, and so on. That right? He should bring the 3 animals and transfer the holiness of the money for the sin offering wherever it is on one for a sin offering. That the money of the burnt offering on one for the burnt offering, and that the money for the peace offering on the one for the peace offering. So because it's all done at once, it will be the money that had been set aside will be designated for the particular animal, even though you can't divide it yourself. Halacha 4, when one of the individuals obligated to bring a pair of doves separated money and said, this is for my obligation, the prohibition against me'ilah applies here, whether you benefit from the entire sum or any portion of the money. That's because the 2 doves are going to be a sin offering and a burnt offering, for which both of them there is the prohibition of me'ilah. So even if you only use part of the money, you can never say, oh, I only use part, because you can only say that when a portion of their money is being used for something that me'ilah would not apply to. But yeah, me'ilah would apply to both types of offerings. If the person dies, he set it aside, the money should be used for free will offerings. So it's best that once money has been set aside for the Beis HaMikdash, even if it can't be used in a specific way, it can be used for free will offering. As we explained above, with regard to the Nazirite, if he had set aside money and then passed away. Prohibition against me'ilah applies to it, and because it can be used in the temple service, that money that's still there. So if somebody misappropriates it, uses it for personal benefit, they will be transgressing the concern of me'ilah and would have to, rectify it accordingly. Halacha 5, when a person sets aside a sin offering for partaking of forbidden fat and brings it for partaking of blood. So now when you bring a sin offering, it has to be set aside and brought for the particular sin. So somebody ate non-kosher fat and he's liable now for a chatat, a sin offering. But he brings it and he intends not for the fat, but for having eaten blood, which is also a prohibition. he has not secured atonement, because it has to all be done with the right intention. But at the same time, by doing that, he's also not liable for me'ilah. Okay, therefore he's not considered to have violated prohibition against me'ilah. But if he set aside money for a sin offering to atone for partaking of forbidden fat, and instead purchased a sin offering to atone for partaking of blood with it inadvertently, he can secure atonement with that offering. So if he did it inadvertently, he can go ahead and still make the offering, and it will be fine. And because he can still go ahead with it, he says, therefore he has violated the prohibition against me'ilah, and it means that prohibition still applies. And if he did so intentionally, he cannot secure atonement with that offering. Therefore, he does not violate the prohibition against me'ilah. In other words, if it's effective for him, if it's effective for him as a korban, there is me'ilah. If it's not effective for him as a korban, there is no me'ilah. That's basically what emerges from this halacha in Rambam. Halacha 6. When a person sets aside 2 salaim for a guilt offering and uses them to purchase 2 rams as ordinary animals. Now these salaim were set aside for holy. Now you're buying rams for yourself. He has committed me'ilah, for he purchased ordinary animals with money designated for a guilt offering. So what must he do? So we know he's got to repay the amount plus a fifth. So he's obligated to pay 10 dinarim, because each seller is 4 dinar. Hold on, excuse me. Each seller is 4 dinarim. Thank you. Each seller is 4 dinarim, and plus the extra, the fifth, or what the actual amount works out to be a quarter, right? So meaning the 2 slime and an additional fifth. He should use this money now. So now what do? He's got this money. What should he do? He should use this money to buy a ram for a guilt offering, and should bring another guilt offering to atone for his me'ilah, right? Because now that he's transgressed me'ilah, he's got the additional guilt offering. There's the original one that he had set aside the money for, and his new obligation. Therefore, if one of the 2 rams that he had purchased is worth 2 sanaim, and the other is worth 10 dinarim, which is a little bit more than the 2 sanaim, he should bring the one worth 10 as a guilt offering, and that will be for the money that he misappropriated and the additional fifth. And he should bring the one worth 2 sanaim as a guilt offering for his new violation of the prohibition of me'ilah. He says different rules apply if he purchased one of the rams as a guilt offering and one as an ordinary animal. So the first example is we took all the money and spent it on something for personal use. But if he took the 2 sanaim and bought one, he actually purchased a korban with, and one he bought something personal with. So he's only misappropriated part of the funds. So then what happens? So if the one purchased as a guilt offering was worth 2 sanaim, he should bring that for the first guilt offering for which he was originally liable, because that's bought as it should have been bought, and that's fine. That will go ahead as its intended korban. Similarly, if the one purchased as an ordinary animal was worth 2 sanaim, he should bring it as a guilt offering for his misappropriation of consecrated funds, because it's the amount that he has to bring. If he misappropriated 1 seller of the money originally set aside for the guilt offering, and then he should pay 5 dinarim, which should be used for a free will offering, which is the extra amount. Halacha 7, when one benefits from money set aside for a sin offering, when benefits from, so he set aside money, it's going to be used to buy a sin offering. And before he's actually offered it, the sin offering, he uses the money. So he should add a fifth to the amount he benefited. So he didn't use the whole amount, but part of it, and bring his sin offering with this money. So add something to the pile, and then bring the sin offering with this money. And then he should bring a guilt offering for his misappropriation of consecrated funds, as is the rectification for his transgression. Similarly, when one benefits from money set aside for a guilt offering, before the guilt offering is offered, he should add a fifth to the amount he benefited and bring his guilt offering with this money, and should bring a guilt offering for his misappropriation of consecrated funds, again from this same money. The rationale is that the money paid for the misappropriation of the animals consecrated to be offered on the altar should be used for such sacrifices. Money paid for the misappropriation, so that's when it comes to animals. You've got the money that you need to repay, use it for that sacrifice that you're going to bring. Money that was paid for the misappropriation of articles consecrated for the upkeep of the temple should be used for that purpose. That money needs to go into basically the temple coffers to be used in the cash flow of the temple needs. Now, in the instance mentioned above, it means you set aside money and you misappropriated it before the korban was bought. So if he discovered that he committed me'ilah with a portion of the money and afterwards his sin offering was sacrificed, but he did not set aside the money, misappropriated as he was required to, which we read earlier. Or he has set it aside, but he did not include within it the money for his sin offering, so it's not the full amount, then the money he misappropriated, an additional fifth, should be taken to the Mediterranean Sea, because he's now brought the korban and he now has the money which he had not set aside previously, and he no longer needs the korban, and now he's got money that he cannot use, so that gets taken out of circulation, put into the sea. Now, but if he discovered that he committed me'ilah with a portion of the money and afterwards his sin offering was sacrificed, the money, so now he has set aside the money for the misappropriation, its additional fish should be used for a free will offering, because he's fulfilled his obligation with the sin offering, and now has money that's set aside, use that for free will offerings. For money is not set aside at the outset. The money for the misappropriation is fund should be used for free will offerings, right? Because although he's setting it aside after he's brought the korban, money that is set aside at the outset is not set aside at the outset to be destroyed. So that's why. So unlike in the first instance, we hadn't set it aside yet. In either instance, he must bring a guilt offering for me'ilah. In both cases, because he misappropriated money, he used it for himself, he's still liable for the guilt offering for the transgression of me'ilah. Now, where the above situation took place with regard to a guilt offering, whether he discovered that he committed me'ilah before his guilt offering was offered or afterwards, the money for misappropriation and its additional fifth should be used for a free will offering, because it is considered as money left over from the guilt offering, and he must bring a guilt offering for me'ilah. Halacha 8, a person who sells an animal designated as a burnt offering or a peace offering has done nothing of consequence, meaning that animal still needs to be bought as a korban. You can't sell it and therefore it's no longer a korban. No, the animal still has to be bought as a korban. Now what happens? You've sold it. Now you've got money for it. So according to scriptural law, the money should be returned to its original state, meaning you've got to give back the money that you made. Nevertheless, our sages penalized the purchaser and required that the money be used for a free will offering. That's the guy that gets it back, should now use it as a free will offering. Even if the animal was worth 4 zuzim and it was sold for 5, all of the 5 should be used for a free will offering. So the animal that was sold needs to be brought, and the money that he gets back must be used for a free will offering. The prohibition against me'ilah does not apply, neither according to scriptural law nor according to rabbinic law. In other words, that money that he got back, he must use it for a free will offering, but if he misappropriated it, there's no me'ilah. Halacha 9, prohibition against me'ilah applies to articles set aside through vows. Okay, so we've been talking about animals set aside for korbanot. We're talking about money set aside that would be used to buy korbanot. Now he's talking about something else. These laws of me'ilah, of misappropriating funds, would also apply to an individual who takes a vow with regard to certain things. So let's see what the example. What's implied? A person said, this loaf is considered like a sacrifice. Or he says it's consecrated property, but he says for me. Okay? If he partakes of it, he violates the prohibition against me'ilah, even though the loaf is permitted to others. Therefore, such an article cannot be redeemed, for it is only considered and consecrated for this purpose. In other words, when something is set aside truly to the Beit HaMikdash, it can be redeemed, because then the funds that it generates will go to the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash. But if somebody just restricts something to themselves and not to somebody else, he's got to treat it as he's designated it, but it also cannot be redeemed by somebody else, because those funds are not going to the Beit HaMikdash, as it were. If he said the loaf is consecrated, so he doesn't say to me, he says this, I'm consecrating this loaf, or I'm setting it aside as a sacrifice. Whether he or someone else partakes of it, the prohibition against me'ilah is violated because it's been set aside for the Beit HaMikdash. Therefore, therefore also can be redeemed, because it was set aside for the temple coffers. Ideally, that's what needs to happen: is that you get rid of you sell it, so the money goes into the temple coffers, which is what they actually need. If an ownerless loaf, now what happens if you see a loaf of bread that was put out by the baker? I guess it was overstocked, whatever you want to call it, and it's left out of night, so it's ownerless. And then the person is standing in front of him, he says, this loaf is consecrated. Should he take it to partake of it? He's considered as if he's misappropriated its entire value. If he took it to endow it to others, considered to have misappropriated the value of giving such gift. So, as if he says this loaf is designated to the temple, and then he eats it himself. it's his violation is the entire worth of the loaf. But if he says it's consecrated and then he takes it, he gifts it to somebody else, then we look at his misappropriation of funds is considered according to the value that gift is worth to him, not the actual precise value of the loaf itself. Halacha 10, when a person tells a colleague, my loaf is considered as consecrated property for you. So somebody comes into your kitchen and you got a loaf of bread and you're worried that they're not eating healthy, you say, my loaf is consecrated to you. You're trying to stop them from eating bread because you think it's unhealthy for them, right? But then I take that loaf and I give it to the guy that I said it's consecrated for him. So the recipient violates the prohibition against Me'ilah when he uses it, because my initial statement stands. The giver does not violate this prohibition because the article is not forbidden to him. So there's a lot of gifted it. I'm not violating anything because right. Similar law applies to all analogous situations applying to other types of vows. If you vow something, the prohibition against Me'ilah applies to those forbidden to benefit from them and not to the others that it does not apply to. All entities forbidden to a person because of a vow can be combined. If he derives a pruta's worth of benefit from the combination, he violates the prohibition against Me'ilah. And halacha 11, our final halacha in this chapter, when a person says these plantings, so he's looking at something that's in the ground, are a sacrifice if they do not get cut down today. So maybe he's trying to encourage whoever it was, his gardener, to cut this stuff down. So he says, if you don't cut it down today, it's designated as a sacrifice. Or he says, this garment is sacrificed if it's not burnt today. And then what happens is day passes and the plantings are not being cut, the garment wasn't burnt, so now it's consecrated, right? And they should be redeemed like other consecrated property. Only afterwards may one benefit from it, because benefit from them as is would be a prohibition. If, however, he says these plantings are a sacrifice until they are cut down, right? Previously he says they will be a sacrifice once they cut down. Here he says until they cut down, they're a sacrifice. He can't do anything with it because as soon as you redeem it, the reality has not changed. They're still standing, right? For whenever they will be redeemed, they will become consecrated again until they are cut down. And once they are cut down, they're no longer consecrated, right? So they don't need to be redeemed. He says, but one may benefit from them immediately. That means just before they get cut. When does the above apply? When the person who consecrated them redeemed them. If I have another person redeem them, they do not become ordinary property, even though they're not being cut down, and they are permitted even to the person who consecrated them. So the person who says they will be consecrated until they cut, he can't redeem it. Somebody else can. Somebody can come along and say, this tree is worth 50 Rand. I'm going to give 50 Rand to the Beis Hamikdash in exchange for this tree, and then that would be considered a valid transfer, and it would be fine. Okay, so we got through that relatively swiftly. Let's take a look at the questions to see if we've understood what we've been learning. First question: in which of the following scenarios does the prohibition of Me'ilah not apply? When money is set aside for a peace offering, when money is set aside for a sin offering, or when money is set aside for a guilt offering? Which one does it not apply to?
I think
is the one that you eat.
The sin offering, I think.
Okay, it's that's not the correct answer. The correct answer would be the peace offering. Okay, because just as the peace offering itself doesn't have Me'ilah because you eat from it, so too money set aside for it. Second question: when money is set aside for the sacrifices to be offered at the conclusion of a Nazirite vow, does the prohibition of Me'ilah apply to the money? Remember, he's just set aside a general sum. He hasn't specified it. So he said the answer is
no.
And the reason is because a portion of it is set aside for like a peace offering, which Me'ilah does not apply. So even though the sum of it will be set aside for offerings where Me'ilah does apply, but because a portion of it is for offerings that it doesn't apply to, broadly, Me'ilah doesn't apply. If an animal set aside as a burnt offering was sold, what should be done? Okay, we've got three options. The money should be returned and the seller is liable for Me'ilah. The money should be used to bring a free will offering and the purchaser is liable to Me'ilah. The money should be used to bring free will offerings, but neither the purchaser nor the seller is liable for Me'ilah. Again, so you set aside, an animal was set aside and you sold that animal. What should you do? So again, you shouldn't have sold it, but we said nothing changes. The animal remains a chatat, and the money itself needs to be used for free will offerings, but neither are liable for me'ila. Okay. And the final question, if one benefits from money set aside for a sin offering, what should be done? He must pay the amount he benefited from and add a fifth to go towards the sin offering. A guilt offering should also be brought. That's the first option. Second option, he must pay the amount he benefited from and add a fifth to pay for a guilt offering. The extra fifth is to pay for a guilt offering. That's option 2. Option 3, he must pay the amount he benefited from and add a fifth to pay for the sin offering. Okay, so that's clearly the first one. He's been liable. He's going to add the fifth, plus he's going to bring the guilt offering, not from the fifth, because it's the 2 aspects that he is liable for. The fifth plus the guilt offering for having transgressed me'ila. Okay.
Very complicated.
There are some subtleties here which are a little bit complicated, but there's also some consistency with the previous halachot that we follow through. Okay, yashar koach, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks for joining, and I'll see you Bezrat Hashem next week. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.